Today's Promode Podcast is episode number 9, and today we are doing it with former CPMA developer and lead level designer Swelt. He is from the UK and he worked in Promode sometime in the early 2000s into the mid 2000s. Prolific level designer that has both a lot of levels and an ability to create levels very quickly from all the people I've had discussions with. Quickly prototyping, random brushes into quite competitive levels. I can't really think of very many other mappers in the Quake scene as a whole that were quite as prolific in terms of level design, especially when it comes to the competitive end of things. Really had an eye for good layouts, good flow, good item placement, quite critical, was able to be quite critical in a meaningful way, and since then went on to do some work, I believe, in Quake 4, and that's really kind of where it ends. He kind of disappears somewhere around 2005 to 2008, and until now I don't think has had much of an opportunity to interact with the CPM community. It seems like he's back now, and so that's who Swelt is as far as I'm aware. Some of his maps that you guys probably know are CPM 18, CPM 21, CPM 29, and a couple of other maps that I'm most likely forgetting. So Swelt, welcome to the show. If you could please introduce yourself, give us an idea of who you are. If there's anything I left out there in your history, please go ahead.
Yeah, sure, go ahead. Right, so yeah, my name's Rich Jakes. But yes, you probably know me better as Swelt. It's been quite a while since I was active in the CPM community. I think you got most of the main beats there. But I was also, I played the game as well. I played with Nobles in the TDM side of things, and I was involved quite a lot on organising some of the events that were going on around that sort of time. I used to run a website called cpma.org.uk with various CPM related blogs, and we hosted one of the early Challenges EU tournaments out of that website. That's the CPM stuff. I guess the other thing that I've done since I did some Doom 3, I did some Quake 4 maps, and I went on and then I did a couple of maps for Quake Live as well. Yeah, but in sort of like the main beats of my Quake history, that's probably it.
I guess we should start at the beginning. How did you start with CPMA, or maybe with Quake, and then maybe that can lead on into how you started with CPMA, and what were some kind of initial memories you have of this early Quake slash CPM scene?
Yeah, so probably you need to go back before Quake 3 and actually to Quake 2 to really understand it. So Quake 2 was my first real online Quake multiplayer gaming. I'd played some Quake 1, but my computer couldn't really handle it. I'd play single player Quake 1 on my mate's PC. But when Quake 2 came out, I could just about afford to get my own PC together. And I started playing online on a modem. In the days when 200 ping was pretty good, 300s and 400 was, yeah, indeed. So, and Quake 2 was an awful lot about the mod scene. So playing the base game was pretty, didn't really excite me that much once I could get into other mods. And the one that really I got quite heavily into was Rocket Arena 2. Played an awful lot of Rocket Arena 2. When Quake 3 came along, Rocket Arena 3 eventually followed, and I was playing quite a lot of different bits of Quake 3, TDM, dueling a bit, but again got quite into Rocket Arena. And then this thing started happening, which was the Rocket Arena scene was plagued with cheats. The quality of the mod was a bit suspect, I guess is the fair way to put it. It was based, as I recall, based on the DLL architecture rather than using the proper Quake code. which made it always going to be vulnerable. And it was at that point in time that I became aware of CPMA as a mod.
Do you remember
Knew
roughly
about
what
it.
year this was? Just to give it a frame.
Sorry, say that
Do
again?
you remember roughly what year this may have been?
So this was probably around 2001, 2002,
Okay.
probably 2001, I guess. So I became aware of CPMA as a mod because I was looking at, okay, what can we do about Rocket Arena? There's this other mod over here that can play Rocket Arena maps. You can play Rocket Arena, but hey, it's got this other stuff built into it. That was how I bumped into Promode gameplay,
Right.
and actually started to get into the CPMA scene a bit more and understand what the Promode movement was all about. That seemed really fun and exciting. The faster weapon switching and all that kind of thing. So that was probably when I started CPMA, and there was a long period of time where it seemed long at the time, probably months, I guess,
Right.
maybe longer.
Yeah, that's right.
Where when there was tournaments were happening in Rocket Arena or they were happening in CPMA, and the UK scene did want to move. The German scene had already moved to using CPMA for Rocket Arena tournaments. I was in a clan that was competing on both platforms and all that kind of stuff. And so eventually most of it shifted, I think, as I recall, over to CPMA. I was involved in a bit of that, but that was when I started understanding what was going on the Promode side of the fence.
Understood. Now, starting off I guess I'll ask this question for a couple of questions actually I have, but I'll start with this one.
Yeah.
Are there any specific memories you have of this early scene? What it was like being in it? Because this is still when kind of the Promode mod is still relatively new, and the gameplay looks quite fresh in comparison to what the VQ3 scene was like.
So some of my memories, there were definite different groups within the community. You had the Polish community was a very strong community, had very strong opinions about how the game should be. You had the French community, similar but different opinions. You had the German community. And I remember each of those communities kind of wanting to play their way in their own way. There was a lot of people who wanted, in those days, fast rail switch, full, very heavy rail game, or flick rail, or lightning to railgun switching gameplay. And I remember later on, as changes started to come through from the mod side of things, different communities didn't like that. But for the actual Promode community, I was coming in from the side, so I was seeing it from the Rocket Arena side, and I think it's fair to say that a lot of the people that are on the sort of the dueling, more hardcore side, probably saw us as the sort of Rocket Arena noob squad.
Right.
And there were people who were outside of that community who were playing OSP, which was the vanilla Quake 3 competition mod, who didn't understand the difference between CPMA as a mod and CPM as a game type.
That continues to be an issue, actually.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. And the fact that a lot of the Rocket Arena servers started switching over to CPMA, people were associating that with, they're playing Promode. You'd have huge debates on servers when people tried to vote Promode on or off again. And the Rocket Arena community started playing with Promode on and off as well. That started to happen, and it was an interesting time.
Now, how did you end up joining the Nobles? Because you joined you start playing CPM sometime around 2001, but as far as I can remember, you'd always carried the Nobles tag with you, and I started playing around 2002. So how did you become a part of the Nobles team, which ended up being quite a famous team in the early European TDM scene in Promode?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. It's all Drex's fault. I think I can say that much. But the exact events, it's all a bit hazy. It's quite a while ago. I think it was a cool way to hang out with other people who were largely UK based at the beginning, who were playing some pro mode. And I think Drex had aspirations that we would do some team deathmatch. Though playing TDM in those early days was going to be really difficult because there wasn't very much by way of competition for TDM.
But sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
Now, I guess, what were some of the major tournaments that you remember being either playing in or administrating that kind of stood out to you in that time?
So, and I confess I had to do some Googling to try and remember how this worked. So I remember that we thought it would be a good... So this was after we'd set up the cpma.org.uk website. We decided we would do an invitational tournament, Challenges EU Invitational, to try and see whether we could run a tournament. So I remember doing that, and I've still got the original rather crappy HTML website we did to do that, and with this little app that would generate brackets if you put in the right CSV file. It's not as tech as the stuff I see that people have got today, and like things like Challenge website and all that kind of stuff. And we had to do it with real basic tools. So having proved that we could do a little tournament and get a bit of attention, get some demos out there on we did the Challenges EU. I'm struggling to remember whether or how that but yes, that I remember we did we were involved in that. But the main tournament that sticks in my mind was probably One Sanity. But you have to go back a little bit to understand One Sanity. Within the CPM, at this point I was helping with the CPM design side of things, mostly mapping. And we decided that we needed to do a drive to get TDM working. It hadn't ever really picked up. There were some things that needed to change. One of those things was we needed a core set of TDM maps that we could use for a tournament, because basically everybody played CPM 4 24/7.
Understood.
And then and some changes to the game mode itself. Things like should weapon dropping be a thing? I think was part of that. But definitely one of the things was the way the power-ups are going to work. The change, I'm pretty sure this came out of this, was the change to have quad every
90 seconds?
Every spawn, but is it 90 seconds?
Yes.
And battle suit every 180.
Was that not a part of the default Quake 3 TDM setup, or no? It was different in VQ3 as well at the time.
It was different in VQ3. I think in VQ3 wasn't it 2 minutes default for both?
I don't remember.
And I think my recollection, and this could definitely be wrong, was that in the original CPM, it was 1 minute for the quad and maybe 2 for battle suit, or not sure. But yeah, we had this sort of little focus group, if you like, some chaps from Team Abuse in the States who went on to run One Sanity, were instrumental, a big part of that, giving a voice on the sort of the gameplay side of things. And my role was to make sure we had the core map set, and that was where CPM 21 came from. So I was desperately trying to finish this map with the feedback of a really high quality it's a really high quality TDM team
In
to get it
abuse,
ready
correct?
for that tournament.
You're
Sorry?
referring to team abuse when you mean
That's
is
right,
that
yeah.
right? Okay, excellent.
Citizen and who was
Method,
the guy?
Wise Guy, Lantern,
Wise Guy, that's it.
Cancer.
It was Wise Guy and Citizen who were big big participants in that TDM group and getting One Sanity to work. Um, and for me, that produced really good feedback on the two of my TDM maps, 18 and 21. We were heavily adjusted to make sure they would fit alongside CPM4. So we had three pretty solid TDM maps. They worked with the team on the rule set, and then we launched into this tournament. And then the tournament itself turned out really good at the time in terms of spectators, demos, and event. That felt like a real high point to me.
Well, two things regarding both those points, the map and the tournament. The maps that you created, 18, especially specifically 18R and 21, continue to be staple maps in Promode TDM whenever they happen. 21 is probably the most played TDM maps to this day. That'll be the default map. I think a lot of players will vote when there's a pickup going on. And when Sanity was and I think still is the last largest North American TDM tournament to happen in any Quake.
Yeah, and it makes me really, really happy to have been part of that, and it's very satisfying when you see something which you've created being used in tournaments and people having fun playing on a map you've created. It's probably the most satisfying bit of all of this.
Well, there's two interesting threads here that we've kind of touched on. There's the design changes in CPM versus vanilla Quake, and then there's the mapping stuff. So maybe we should just touch on the design stuff first, because I think that might be a bit more brief, and then get on to the specific maps and mapping and level design for Quake in general. So there's stigma between the VQ3 community and the CPM community still is around. Even though the communities are relatively diminished in their player bases, there's still this kind of question with respect to what's better. So as one of the designers in the CPM, especially the CPM that became the standard pro mode, which still exists today, between the two games, now that there's been about 10, 15 plus years of competitive history in both those games since the last real major changes were made, what design decisions do you think you guys made that were right? Which ones do you think that maybe in retrospect weren't as right? And then when you look at the two, which one would you think is better and why?
Yeah, so I've got a particular perspective on design decisions, because my time in the design team was after the first Pro Mode came along. So the original Pro Mode design team, which I think it's fair to say was more heavily influenced by Quake World gameplay.
Correct.
Had done their work, and they produced CPM version 1 and the gameplay that people loved associated with that. When I was part of the design team, it was in a later phase when we were trying to make changes to evolve that, and in some cases it was paring back on some of those early decisions. So I was part of the team, and this was Archon, Ix, myself, and a few others in IRC channels late at night, debating ad nauseum. Can we change this? Can we not? Things like fast rail, and so do I think the original fast rail gameplay was better or worse? I think in the end, I probably prefer it post that change. I think that the LG rail combos in the original CPM probably were just too harsh, too much of a gimme. But I can imagine that there's still debates to this day
Correct.
about whether that was the right decision or not.
Well, even the decision what's interesting is that debate continues to be the case, but no longer with respect to the old version of CPM, whether in its current form it's too strong.
Mm-hmm.
Because aim, as you can imagine, has improved drastically, and we've had like these just hit scan gods come through the game and just demolish people with LG to rail combos.
Mm-hmm. And when we were designing modems, were still a thing. My ISDN was pretty good. I had a 40 ping, right? And these days, I imagine it's all really harsh. Things like tweaking down the LG damage, the various changes went through the plasma gun, rail damage. What's the rail damage these days?
80.
80, 90. Yeah, okay. So yeah, we you probably have to recognise that the original values were set for a world where it was harder because of the conditions you were mostly playing in.
Correct.
The problem that you always had was, well, what happens if you do manage to get on LAN? Suddenly, LG damage was originally 8 points, I think, came down from there. But if you actually got somebody who had really good connection, or you got onto a LAN, then that would just be ridiculous. Or just turn the game into a very different. The balance of the game such that LG is just okay, fine. It's a monster weapon. You've got to deal with it. And I imagine that a lot of the debate is, should LG be a monster weapon, or is a point and click weapon with no cool up or wind up or cool down? Is that fine? Is it fine for it to be? They're both valid points of view, but you can argue in circles for a long time, and we did.
Continues through the case. Now, there's always been a lot of criticism in CPM, especially as far as the dual aspect of it is concerned in comparison to VQ3. I think a lot of people will make a claim something to the effect of like, VQ3 requires a lot more thought, a lot more planning, whereas CPM dual is a lot more, I don't know if mindless is the right word, but a lot more reactionary. Is there anything you would have to say to comment on this kind of stark difference between Promode dual and VQ3 dual?
So, one of the things I saw when we had some of those early tournaments was, a lot of it depends on the caliber of the players. I got to watch Rat playing Vu quite a lot, and the game completely changed when they were playing. Vu could be quite defensive. I mean, everybody remembers I guess at the time, I don't know, I assume it's still quite well known, Vu's Promode video.
Yes.
Where he goes around and destroys a bunch of noobs in very impressive style, and it was fantastic fun to watch. And he did some awesome stuff in it. But if you watched him play against Rat, then and I guess your audience knows who Rat is.
Yes.
Then the game was very different. It was knife edge stuff, low scoring, heavily defensive, all about traps and placement. And there was an awful lot of mind works going on. You could see it on both sides. You could watch players like that completely destroy players who didn't know what they were doing. So I think an awful lot of people's impressions of CPM dual are derived from, if I'm honest, low caliber play.
That's fair.
I don't know, and I think that probably has a big influence. And I don't know what the scene's like today in terms of the caliber of play and how much. And this is the bit that's the design side of things. I don't know to what extent the design decisions that were taken enable a plus forward style, because that was probably a design intention, which I don't want it to be. At the time, if you're comparing, the anti-pattern was what we were seeing in VQ3, and by anti-pattern I mean the opposite of what we were trying to achieve was people playing ZTN DM3. On ZTN DM, which one is it? Yeah, Blood Run. Yeah. And playing for 10 minutes and it's 0-0. That's an anti-pattern. And likewise, the other anti-pattern was running around and thrashing people to death with machine guns, your spawn weapon.
Yeah.
Those were the things that we didn't want. But is it possible that in encouraging plus forward gameplay and aggressive gameplay that you could have gone and enabled mindlessness? I don't know. That certainly wasn't what we were trying to.
No, and I think if you look at CPM, CTF, and CTM, TDM, I think it's considerably more intelligent than their VQ3 counterparts, where the MG is very dominant and the kind of stale movement makes sure that people go in straight lines, so it's really easy to hit a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and definitely the whole idea that you've got not every weapon should be as good as each other. That you have to, and once you've got a weapon or you've got a piece of armor, that you've earned an advantage, not just another couple of seconds against a machine gun or time to live. That's definitely by design.
Now, were there any kind of design choices that the Promode team were kind of looking to make, which they didn't because due to some sort of inactivity? What was the next step from Promode as far as that specific design team was concerned?
I can't think of an example of something we didn't do. I can think of things that we didn't maybe pull off at the time. So, Huni mode.
Okay.
Was a concept that Richard Sadler Huni came up with that we got implemented, but I think it probably needed something more to be to become what it could have been. I don't know what's become of that. It's interesting. I can see shades of it in the way the Quake Champions dual mode works.
Correct.
Similarly, the sort of Team Fortress alike, although Arkham would kill me for calling it that. That's the one, not Team Fortress.
Right.
That was an interesting concept that I don't know if that ever reached its potential while I was still in.
Well, with Huni mode, I think you're right. I think it does need something else. I'm not too sure where it was. Were there any kind of ideas what that design team had for what that might be to kind of move it along to the next step?
And excuse me a moment while I sneeze.
No.
I can't recall. I think it was a kind of like a let's prototype, let's see how it works, and see what we can do with it. Play it. Oh well, it was clear when we played it. It's a nice idea, but how can we make it more exciting? How can we get people into it? I don't know. We kind of brickwalled, I think.
NTF ended up being a really popular pub mode. It felt like it was just a lot less stressful to play than TDM or CTF because you didn't have to worry about picking up weapons and stuff or what roles people had. The unfortunate knockoff was that it was like super spammy, and I think that's also what makes it a little bit fun. It's a mode that people enjoy, but truthfully said, when we've attempted to play in a competitive format, it's not quite as fulfilling or as satisfying as TDM or CTF. But honestly, I think it's a great pub mode and should be the default pub mode over something like just a plain CTF, because I think it makes things a little bit easier. You sacrifice some of the depth, but you get something that's a lot more fun to play and a lot more kind of intuitive from the player's perspective, because games like TF2 have become so pervasive in gaming culture. Everyone's aware of like, okay, there's a scout, a sniper, a heavy, and a soldier.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And that makes sense. But I mean, one of the some of the things that we debated for ages were things like how do you make ammo interesting, a part of the game without it being a chore.
Yeah.
And that's across the game in TDM as well, right? The notion that wouldn't it be good if picking up an ammo box was something, a thought process that it has an outcome. Yes, it might, but on the other hand, it's just not that exciting to pick up an ammo box. And are you really going to remember where they all are? Or are you just going to hoover everything? Yeah. So how you do that in a mode where weapon spawns aren't a thing? Yeah, those are the kinds of discussions that you probably need to go and have to turn NTF into something.
Yeah, NTF's it's an interesting place. I think the more competitive you attempt to make it, the more likely you are to have lots of very strong parallels with CTF, and then at that point when you have two game modes that play so similarly, you have to really ask what what the value of that is to the player. Because I think it's just likely that one of them will just get ignored. Whereas when you have these much more stark differences, and NTF, I guess there is some levels of ammo management, but if you go to mid, you can just farm 10 players very quickly and get tons of ammo too. So I guess, are there anything else you'd like to discuss specifically with the history of the design decisions on within the context of CPM, or I guess within the context of CPM versus VQ3? And if not, we can just start talking about some mapping stuff.
Yeah, there's nothing. I don't think there's anything that I think we've as major that we. So let's talk about mapping.
So, how did you start with mapping? When did you start, and what was the process like initially when you started? Because I think I remember seeing one of your very early maps, and I think it's still in the CPM map pack. It's a TDM map, and it wasn't nearly as good as some of the others. So I guess, how did you start mapping?
So, in the very olden days, I did some maps for Doom, very first, Doom or Doom 2 probably. I had a go at mapping for Quake 2, didn't really work, and it was really, I think it might have been Drex hassling me again, that got me into starting Quake 3 mapping. It's like, we've got a need here. We need CPM in its nascent state. Really needed maps. I fancied having a go, so I learned how to map. My very first map is absolutely awful version of DM4 from Quake 1, and it was really bad. Everybody's first map is really bad. What you should really do with your first map is make it and delete it, or put it somewhere, but never show it to anybody. My second map was the first version of CPM 18. The an ugliest sin you probably haven't seen. It's probably still in there somewhere. CPM 18, and it became CPM 18i, which was
With the invis.
With them, and that was as a result of that CPM working, the TDM working group thing that I mentioned before, Vanity. Oh yeah, which reminds me that was one of the things the working group did, was we fixed invisibility.
Did it not work before?
No, we had, well, it was the VQ3 invisibility was this sort of shell effect,
right?
And if you did certain things with your console variables, you just saw this pink guy running around.
Lol.
So that wasn't really all that invisible. So we fixed it so that it's in its. We gave it a proper icon, and made it so that you couldn't really see the guy. It wasn't eyes. People wanted us to do it as eyes. Is it the floating skull?
Yes.
I can't remember. Yes, which I think I might have made. The floating skull. The shader for the skull to turn it into. Anyway. Yeah. So maps. Back to maps. Yeah. So working. I started building this map. Big blocks. Rapid prototype. Tried to pull together a map that would be interesting. I think, to be honest, I got the scale completely off what I had in my mind when I drew it on a bit of paper. But the scale is kind of, in the end, what makes it what it is, what it was. And then I got a bunch of guys from Nobles to help me make it less shit. So it started out probably about twice the size it is, and I sort of squashed it down and made the rooms tighter and brought things together, and we sort of iterated together, and we turned it into something we could use. yeah, that was my first proper map, really, one that was actually an original map, and which was used. And it wasn't until quite some time later that the Redux version, CPM18R, came along, which was not as ugly as Sin, and that was done by Lunarin,
Correct.
I think.
That's right.
Yeah, who I learned a lot from, actually, in terms of how to make a map look good. If you look at my early maps, they don't look particularly pretty. I understood how to make a map and how to make it so that you could play on it without burning your eyeballs out too badly, but that I was not part of the proper mapper squad who knew all of the rules about visual design and how you ought to light maps and the subtleties of shaders. And I very much learnt that gradually over the process of making maps. So I wasn't going to let that not understanding how to make them look good stop me from making them. So that's why they look the way they do, I guess.
There's a pretty big jump in terms of complexity between your DM4 remake, which I do remember, and then CPM18. Like, not a lot of mappers actually can go from making kind of a shit quality map to a map that is, at least its core design becomes a staple in a community. What is your, from what you can remember, what is your level design process like, from kind of the initial designing phases, maybe like what inspires you and where you draw inspiration from, then to the building phase, and then towards the end as you finish it up? So what is your workflow like when it comes to mapping?
That's a good question. And it varies. I think a lot of the time it comes from just a bit of an idea. Okay, I've got a bit of an idea. I want to make something. I want to make a large map, a small map. I've got an idea for something in a map. And then I'll block it out in big blocks, and I'll jump around in it. And I very much have to do that kind of prototyping and get a feel for the space, and then sort of iterate on that. It's very much about the shapes and the how you can imagine a combat in a space. So if I put together a room, I think, okay, I can imagine this guy's fighting over here against that guy, and he's got the upper ground, so that's interesting. But does he need something? Would you need something else to make that combat interesting? You need something to hide behind. You need some kind of trick jump or some other route to get around, and try and imagine that as you go through, and then go back. Okay, blocks. Move this here. That doesn't look. This bit's just not interesting. Let's chuck that bit away and put something else in its place. But it wasn't always like that. Interestingly, CPM21, somebody whose name I'm struggling to remember,
Xfu.
That's right. Xfu had put together a bunch of interesting blocky bits of map. He'd been trying to sort of make some interesting shapes. Didn't really know what to do with them. So and sort of published them, said, "Here you go. If you can do anything with this, great." And so what I did then was I kind of just took chunks of his thing, lobbed them all together in a bit of a structured space, and said, "Okay, fine. Let's iterate with these blocks." Some of them, completely changed. So the mega health room with the water and rail pipe and everything, that was completely different. I took what had been a flat shape and completely changed the elevation, turned into the red armor room. Started out as one big space and got crushed and turned round and laid on top of or underneath the other room that's above it to turn it into a space. But the original combat spaces or shapes, the inspiration for those came from X, which was a deviation from my normal process, I guess.
I think you can have some people crying when you say you just lobbed together a bunch of brushes and turned it into CPM21. I think people are looking I don't think that's what people were expecting in terms of an answer. This is a difficult question. I mean, you have an eye for like hyper competitive maps. It seems like everything you've touched to has turned into some sort of staple within. Like you look at CPM 29, that's a very standard 2v2 map. CPM 18, 21, 26, they get a lot of play as well. Um, I guess if there's any tips you have, or any advice you have, or any lessons you have for any people who are currently mapping, because there are quite a bunch of people mapping right now. There's been a bit of a renaissance in terms of like the mapping scene in CPM. What would that be for them, and how? I guess are there any things that you would guide them toward? Outside of like, making interesting rooms, which I think that's what they're trying to do, but I guess the question is how do you get something to go from, just a bunch of blocks to something interesting? It's a tough question, I understand.
It is, yeah. So, and one of the things I used to do around that kind of time, when I was making loads of maps, was I was also very active on the CPM mapping forum, looking at other people's stuff. And I would be trying to give them feedback, trying to give them help, and looking at how their early map structures were coming, and doing the same process that I go through, which is trying to imagine gameplay. Okay, what makes gameplay in this space interesting? Because if you just play in square boxes, it's not interesting gameplay. So you need something to make combat interesting. At the same time, trying to look at, okay, if I go from here to here to here, I've picked up these 3 items. Are they appropriately spaced? Are the places that the items sitting, are they interesting? If you've got a room which is going to be your room with your key weapon, is the space that weapon is in, is it interesting? Could it be made into a trap? Making players make choices, I think, is something you have to do. You have to, if you put a red armor in a trap space, you say, okay, are you going to go and take that red armor? Are you going to take the risk to go and grab that? You look at that's one of the key things that I've put a lot of emphasis into. I think is if I and you can see it in DM4. If you go back to DM4, you've got that whole room. If you go in that room, you're going to get the rocket launcher. You're going to get the mega health, I'm going to say, but you've got to get back out again. You take that kind of trap board and put that in little tins, and that could be a 25 health bubble. But if the 25 health bubble is placed somewhere, anytime that player wants to get health, is he got to take a tiny little risk? Well, he's got to take a tiny little risk if you make the place slightly exposed. If you put a little something above its head so somebody below him could shoot up. He's predicted that the player is going to have low health. He's going to run to a health blob. Okay, well, if I make it so that there is a little bit of risk in that space, I've made a bit of interesting gameplay out of just one little item. But I guess it takes, trying to imagine gameplay in the space. Try to do that before you've started making the map look good. Make it ugly as sin. If you need to for your imagination, because I can't cope with everything completely grey, make it just pretty enough that your imagination can kick in, but definitely do not do anything that will stop you carving into it and changing it to make it different. When you've had a look, tried it, and it doesn't seem like it'll be fun or interesting, make people make interesting choices.
This was going to be one of my questions, but I guess you've answered it here. What makes a good map a good map? And that's, I guess, this ability or this need for the players to make interesting choices between either one thing or multiple things. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think choices because if you look at what you've got in the gameplay, you've got your basic skills. Can I point my mouse pointer at the player and do my shots? Something I've never been all that great at. So then you've got the strategy and the tactical side of things. How can I dominate by controlling items? How can I recover quickly from an engagement? All of those kind of probably more tactical than strategy, but both apply. And trying to make all of those things interesting at a macro level and a micro level, and make it so that it's all about the choices you make as much as your raw skills. I think that's what makes a good map. If it encourages and rewards both aspects.
Looking at your portfolio of maps, what would you say are some of the strengths in terms of design and some of the weaknesses in design? Maybe it could be, map specific, or are they kind of general design themes that you see ranging in the maps that you created, at least?
So I definitely I learned an awful lot over the period I was making maps about how to make things look good. So if you look at my early stuff, CPM 18, the original, for example, I didn't know how to light maps very well. I fairly early clocked onto the idea that it's better to light things with shaders than it is with entities. So for those that aren't into mapping, you can either create an invisible little blob that emits light, the renderer calculates that, or you can apply a texture, and that texture will emit a light of a particular color. If you look at the original CPM 18, which might these days require sunglasses, I decided that I was going to have colored lighting in different sections of the map to help the player orient, and to so you'd know if you were in the yellow armor room because there'd be a yellow light. What that actually resulted in was some pretty funky full-on lighting,
Right.
because I had a good idea. Let's have different areas of the map look different so you can recognize where you are, but implemented it in a really rather basic, over-the-top way. So that's probably a bit of good and bad, right? And if you look at some of my later maps, by brute force having made loads, but also having worked with other mappers who were stronger on the actual mapping side of things, I think they got better. Although I still look back at CPM 24 and think, how did anybody let me release it with the lighting in that state?
Well, sorry, if you have something to add to that, I'm happy to.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, well,
Yeah, no,
I guess we might as well talk a couple of design decisions to bring up. 18R has, I don't remember if it's the case in 18 and 18i, but definitely 18R, which became the standard version of 18, that played there. I guess there's two questions here. What was it like working with Linarin, who ended up being quite kind of prestigious in the Quake community for making maps look really, really exceptional? And why 2 LGs? Because that's one of the few maps that actually has 2 LGs period in any Quake map.
Yeah. Why 2 LGs? Honestly, I can't remember why there were 2 LGs. Can I blame Drex for that? It could be Drex. It could be me. It could be me there's one thing about good map design is knowing all the rules and then knowing when to break them.
Correct.
But I've got to be honest, I don't know that I knew I was breaking a rule at that point. I think
rule is hard. Maybe convention is better. But even though I'm not asking why, because I'm attempting to indicate it was a mistake. I'm asking why because I want to know the design decisions behind the second LG.
Yeah, and I'm struggling now to remember even the LG placement down in the little room below the quad.
Correct, and there's another one in the RA room.
Yeah. I've got. Was it because it felt like if you had the RA room, you had and the LG, then that would give you too much strength. It needed to counterbalance give something to the down team. I think it was that. I think it was looking at balancing because one of the things at the time was our frame of reference at that point in time for what CPM DM looked like was CPM4, right? And that was all we played. So we wanted, and very much conscious of the up team, the down team. So the up team would get control and destroy the down team.
Correct.
How can we make it so that that's not always the case? How can we make it so that the guys who are getting their asses handed to them have a chance to fight their way back into it? So I think it probably came out of that. It was, how can I have some kit for the team who's getting dominated to work their way back in? So put some powerful items in places that you can't just control time, or make it so that the up team has to be stretched so thin to do that gives the down team a somewhere to get a foothold and come back.
Now, CPM 20, thank you for answering. I think that makes sense, and I can't expect you to, and I don't expect you to remember this specific. It's been probably 15 years since you actually made that decision, so I completely understand. CPM 24 ended up being quite a prolific map in the Quake community as a whole, because it ended up getting ported to Quake 4, and it kind of became a staple map in their competitive community. And I think even now, like with the Quake Champions forums, you'll see people asking for Frantic back. What was the kind of design? Listen, I'll be honest with you. When I because I'm a person also with awful aim. When I initially played CPM 24, my impression was that it was just like a glorified version of Amphi. That's what it felt like, because it felt like it was just a lot of combat. But I imagine that was a very conscious design choice. What was the process of designing CPM 24 like in CPM, and then again in Quake 4?
So I think the original CPM 24 was the 11th map I had made, and at that point I think I had not made a dual map. So I'd made all these TDM maps, 2v2, 4v4 stuff, but I hadn't done a dual map. So I felt, okay, I probably should have a go at making a dual map. What's my frame of reference? Well, I've always been very fond of DM4 gameplay. Let's start with the whole, okay, most powerful item in a trap area of the map. Risk, reward. Okay, let's start with that. Okay, fine. And riff around that. I guess Aero Walk was a bit of an influence for me as well, although I can't claim that Frantic manages that. But the idea that you've got a main hub and you've got loops that bring you back to the same main hub area was in my mind. And yeah, I just, again, I threw together some boxes, had a play around with it.
You're gonna make people really fucking cry if you're just gonna keep saying you're just throwing together random boxes.
But that's the process. You put the blocks together, you jump around in it, you get other people to have a jump in around it, you watch them, you watch yourself, iterate, change it, try to make it interesting, keep going. I think I was never that keen on CPM 24, the CPM version. There were bits about it I didn't like, and when I did the versions for Quake 4 and for Doom 3, the other way around, Doom 3 first, then Quake 4. They were different because Doom and Quake's engine, Quake 4's engine, wouldn't support the kind of flow-through architecture. So you could be really lazy with Quake 3 at that point in terms of what you can see, your visibility. There weren't that many polygons in my map, not least because I was also pretty lazy with the architecture. So when I came to do it for Doom 3, Quake 4, because of the specs that you needed to run Doom when it came out, and the real lighting engine, I had to make it so there were distinct areas and you couldn't see one area from another, and that transformed the map into that sort of structure. So when I and in doing so, it probably reinforced the there are different rooms. That's probably the reason why the sort of the post frantic versions are like that. And then the Quake Live frantic version, I tried to sort of do in the spirit of that version rather than the CPM24 original. I've had people ping me asking me to make the lava shallow in CPM24.
Yeah.
It was one of the first things that people said to me when I popped my head back into Discord. But I've always thought that that was a big part of the risk. So the low level was supposed to be a hazard, right? Going down to that low level where you've got, I can't even remember, is it the red armor in that room?
Yes, the red armor is in the trap room.
Yeah. So if you want to go and get that, you have to take the risk. A big part of the risk is just being on that low level is a risk.
Correct.
But if the lava's shallow, then dipping a toe in lava is just not that much of a hazard. So whether it should be shallow enough that you can get out of it more easily, that's a design debate, right? But it was definitely intended to be super hazardous.
Now, it's interesting that it seems like DM4, even though you started off with Quake 2, DM4 seems to be a big inspiration for you in terms of your mapping. But there's another Quake 1 map that, well, actually, if you have anything to comment on that, I'm happy to let you go ahead. Sorry.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because the actual where I learned to duel was Q2DM1, but from a mapping point of view, trying to aspire to do what Q2DM1 did was a bit much for me with the skills that I had, if I'm honest.
Fair enough.
Right? So Q2DM1 I consider to be one of the great maps of all time, but it's great in a really complicated way and really hard to reproduce, whereas DM4 is great in a simple way that as an inspiration is much easier to pull off. And since I was learning to do dual mapping, that's why I aped it in CPM24.
Sorry, I was saying there's another Quake 1 map that you attempted to remake for CPM, and I think it might be one of your last additions towards Quake 3, and that was Noble's DM19, which I think Noble's DM19 that was the ZTN kind of remix for CPM. I've heard IX comment on this as well, that he's really disappointed that they could never get ZTN to work in CPM. Why do you think that is? And did you have any ideas for how you could get ZTN to potentially? Because if you look at every Quake, like Quake 3, Quake 1, Quake Live, and now Quake Champion, ZTN is a staple map, and it seems to work well in all of those maps. But CPM is kind of an outlier here in that it doesn't seem to work in CPM. Any reasons why that might be the case?
Yeah, and I certainly did try.
You did,
but there were a couple of things with that map. Archon, I remember being very keen that we did not include that in the map pack at the time because he didn't want, and I can't remember his reasons, but I didn't think he wanted it to be an official Promode project for me. So it was a me project to try and make ZTN work. A lot of it was to do with actually playing ZTN VQ3 version in CPM. I think a lot of it was to do with the armor. There was too much armor, too many routes to back off. The scale of the map as a whole meant it was too easy for plus back gameplay. And you could see it in VQ3 duels. I know that you can have some really tense and exciting VQ3 duels, and you can get some quite high scoring games, but it does take the participation of the players to do that, I think, or at least it did at the time when I was following that. And there were too many times when you could see that if the players were going to play defensively, that the map gave them just too many opportunities to do that. So sort of squishing the map down a little bit, introducing green armor, reducing the so things that I identified at the time as objectives. But beyond that, no, I don't know. I don't think there can be anything fundamentally stopping that map working. But must be wrong because
It never
or at
really
least
caught on.
enough people have tried.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Error Walk on the other hand was the complete opposite. As soon as it became introduced into CPM, it became the staple. In fact, I would guess that Error Walk has seen more play than any other map, maybe even any other two maps combined in Promode versus everything else.
Yeah, and we used to play the blue version
Yes, Quake 3 Arrow.
ad nauseum. Yeah, an awful lot. And then and we went through a very difficult process when Hubster we got agreement that it could be included as an official map. He wanted to make changes to make it more like the original. But then, of course, that created tension because people have fallen in love with the blue version. So
right.
that was a fun time.
How did you guys end up with CPM 22? Because that's I think even further removed from the original version than Quake 3 Arrow, the blue version.
It was, yeah, but I think it was the intention was to make it more like the original.
Understood. Do you think they achieved that?
To be honest, I think it stands as each version you see stands its own version. The things that were fixed about it, things like the curvy arches, when got rid of, as I recall.
Yep.
Yeah, there were positive changes that were made. The ability to shoot up at the feet of the red armor. I think was that in the original?
Not in Quake 3 Arrow, but I think in the original Arrow Walk for Quake World.
Yeah. So that putting that back in, that was one of the key. So there were elements that made more like it. The making the jump to the red armor. So there used to be the little clip off the corner, as I recall.
Correct.
Yeah, making that harder. It's rare. Every time you fail that jump, you can thank the fact that we were trying to make it more like it would. But yeah. Can you ever take a Quake 1 map and make a CPM map like it? Given the attempts I've made, I think the answer is, or the lesson that I've learned is always going to be, there's something about the scale, player height scale, jump height scale, that just makes the game feel different. I did a whole bunch of conversions of Quake and Quake 2 maps to Quake 3, and you were never left thinking, yeah, this is spot on. You have to adjust something to make it fit and to make it work. The numbers just won't let you do it as an exact, and it feel right.
Now, after you did some, I guess we'll talk about Quake Live and your kind of experiences with the software afterwards. My next question was going to be with respect to, let me think, when you look at Quake VQ3 and then you look at the maps for CPM, there's a big difference in terms of the kind of scales. It seems like with VQ3 maps you can have considerably larger maps and they can still work. You can have pretty aggressive games on them. And I think with a bigger map you can have the opportunity to have more interesting spaces. But in CPM it seems like there's a certain threshold with respect to the map size after which plus back just becomes far too strong. And or not just plus back, it just becomes hard to trap a player or hard to predict where they're going to be because of the movement system. Any particular thoughts on this as to why this might be the case and what you think could remedy it? Could you see a larger dual map working in CPM? Like for example, I think Sinister's a relatively big map in Quake Live for a dual map. And what are your thoughts on this and the general differences between VQ3 and CPM maps?
So let's think. So the analogy that I always used to make was DM2 from Quake 1. People duel on DM2 in Quake 1. It's a massive map. And there's huge opportunity for players to lose each other.
Yes.
But and the only reason, if you introduced DM2, if it was completely new, forget it never happened, and you introduced it into a game like Quake 3, Quake World Champions, whatever, people wouldn't say, "Oh, there's a dual map there, we could play that." They would go, "All right, it's a TDM map." The only reason that it makes it as a dual map, in my opinion, is that there was a period of time when there were so few choices. Everybody learned side out. Everybody knows absolutely everything in minute detail, and so the prediction and the knowledge of seeing and pathing rises to such a level that you can have an effective duel on it. So if you come back then to a community like a mod-led community where you've got multiple options, to introduce a custom map to a community and say, I know this map looks big, but I want you all to learn it inside out so that you can duel on it. It's just not going to happen.
That's fair.
So I think there's an awful lot of that we probably need some special circumstances to have a really big, complicated map, make it as a dual map, and maybe that's that you give real consideration to how it will duel, but make it popular in a different format. So, for example, if it's really popular as a free-for-all or TDM map, but can also work as a dual map, then that might be one way to get a large map in as a dual map. And I think what was the map you mentioned? Sinister? Is that a Quake?
Correct.
3?
Quake Live.
Quake Live map. Which one is that?
I don't even. I'm gonna have to Google it myself.
Yeah. Another example probably would be in Quake Champions. One of the maps I think they're playing on is Ruins of Sarnath.
Yes.
I think they started dueling on that.
Yes.
And that's a big map. That's a big map. It looks complicated, but there's so few maps in Quake Champions, and it's really well liked in TDM. I think that gives you the kind of platform which will let you do take a big map and make it into a dual map. Could you do that in CPMA? Could you do that with CPM gameplay? I don't see why not. The problem I guess you face is the ability for a player to escape very quickly because.
Correct.
And could you just run rabbits around in the. I would like to think that it should be doable, but I think you would have to try it. You need to find that map that is well enough known to begin with by two players, and say, okay, you both know this map. Let's try and have a proper duel.
Was I right to suggest that that was the last project you worked on when it comes to CPM, or was it CPM 29?
CPM. So I'm just thinking about the no numbers.
Sorry.
So no DM 18 was a rework of something else, and CPM 29 was no DM 16. So yes, no, that was probably the last thing I did in Quake 3.
You're also credited as a designer on Hectic.
Yeah.
Was maybe thinking back on it, maybe that was the last project. Is that fair to say?
Well, so Hectic I made for Quake Live.
Understood.
So yeah. So and there's some stuff. So with the thing with Quake Live, there's a bit of a story there. So when was it? Quake Live was what, about 2010? I guess?
Somewhere between 2008 and 2010. Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. So Syncera was trying to get some maps to use in Quake Live. He wanted to get community maps into Quake Live. I'd previously done some stuff with him in Quake 4, so that he took 2 of my Quake 4 maps and he included those in the community map pack. I'm struggling to remember exactly how it happened, but he wanted to use something, and I think it was CPM21 in Quake Live, and I asked if I could make something new, and offered him a Quake Live version of Frantic, redone in the Quake Live style with the Quake Live text, and modelled more after the Quake 3, Quake 4. And then I thought, okay, well, I want to make something new, and I've learned quite a lot about Point, and I made Hectic, and at this point, Cinco had actually got it set up, so I had a link into their CDN. I could go through their firewall, work directly, and save my cut stuff straight on their server, which was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And I also did one other map for Quake Live Tornado. It's a TDM map.
Tornado Quake Live map?
Quake Live Tornado. What's it called? They're just names in Quake Live. Quake Live Tornado. Google it. It's got curves. So I learned how to do curves after. So one thing you'll notice, right, in all of my CPM maps, there's no curves. I never learned how to do curves. And when I came to actually working for Quake Live, I thought, I've got to do this. I've finally got to learn how to make a curve. So I did. And that's why the Frantic in Quake Live has curves. The Hectic has all curvy bits, and Tornado is basically Swelt gets carried away with curves.
Yeah, that's what it looks like. I'm looking through the pictures right now.
I was probably quite disappointed that didn't take off so much, Tornado. But I don't know whether the VQ3 community was up for a Swelt TDM map.
Did you end up making the Quake 3 version of Hectic as well? Did you end up making that after or before the Quake Live version?
So actually, I think City approached me about making the Quake 3 version.
Understood.
I gave him my permission to do that. Had first exchange with City in the past, and I trusted him to do it.
Which one do you think looks better, the Quake 3 version or the Quake Live version?
I'll say the City's is very stylish and understated, and mine is brown. But they're different. I'm proud of what I did because in the Quake Live version, but City I think is probably a stronger purist mapper, so I'm happy to say that his probably looks better. But watching the VQ3 professionals playing on Hectic was really satisfying, just as watching professionals play on the Quake 4 and the Doom 3 versions of Frantic was, it's really something else to watch those sort of high-level tournaments get played out. Up there with watching One Sanity games playing on CPM 21. Really satisfying.
When I look at CPM 29 and then the ZTN remix that you had made, there seems to be a consistent kind of design that it looks like you were aiming for at that point, but it never looks outside of CPM 29. I don't think any got implemented into any maps, just because CPM 29 is the last official CPM map. Do you remember kind of where you were going with this kind of, I don't know if post-apocalyptic is right, but there was this kind of this Orwellian society kind of look that you were going for at the time. Is there anything you remember of what inspired you to that? Or anything
I'd like to say I had really, really sort of great design inspiration, but I think probably the truth was I found a nice texture set, and I used it on 3 maps actually. There's a DM3 remake, CPM 29, and the ZTN remake, and it's just it was a texture set that was really easy to work with, to take from that prototype stage and slap these textures on in big blocks and it look good enough to play with. So I liked the textures and I used them a few times, but it was mostly because they were really easy to work with.
Were there any maps that you had started working on that you never got to finish and never released anything to the public?
There were things that never made it out of prototype, definitely, but nothing that really got to the point that said this is good enough for me, but I won't show it to anybody. Let me see if there's a. Yeah, I don't think so.
Now, looking at Quake Champions, they seem to have a bunch of new maps. Are there any of the maps in particular stick out to you? And if they do, what about them sticks out for you?
So I'm, on the whole, I'm generally quite impressed with the Quake Champions maps from a design point of view. In some regards, although there are things that annoy me from a old school point of view. I like the way they've structured the spaces. I think the flow of the map, they've obviously put a lot of thought into how gameplay will happen on those maps. There's a lot of interesting opportunities, I think, for gameplay. A lot of the maps. The whole, and this is just product of the time, I guess,
Yep.
but the fact that the floors aren't flat and the scenery, probably some of it you can shoot through and some of it you can't, or the fact that everything these days is a mesh is, I guess, just the nature of the commercial game. It would be nice to say, oh, let's go for something purist like we had with CPM and Quake 3, like we had with things like Reflex, but a commercial product, I understand why it's not. There's some maps I don't think they haven't quite nailed yet. So what is that, Vale of Penarth or
Correct.
something like that?
I think that just has big issues with scaling. I think they need to open up a lot of the corridors so you can actually have a rocket fight inside of them, because right now it seems like one guy goes in, the entire hallway is plugged.
Yeah, and I'm mixing this. There's two similar-ish looking ones. Lockbox is the other one. I think they're trying for both of those. Trying for a particular style, and I think they just haven't quite nailed that yet. But those are the ones that nobody ever votes for. So they must be getting that message. They must be seeing the data. So I'm sure they'll have a go at tweaking those.
I guess we'll put the designer hat back on. Now that you've had it seems like you've been not actively, but it seems like people have told me they've run into you in Quake Champions and stuff like that. So it seems like you're putting some time into it. Looking at Quake Champions, what do you think of it? What are your thoughts? Where do you think its strengths are and its weaknesses are? And where do you see it going?
So I think it's an interesting product. Yeah, I'm playing. I'm dabbling in Quake Champions because these days busy with other stuff. But it's a game that you can drop into, have a quick blast, and then go and do something else. Do your daily boxes, whatever. The whole Champions thing is obviously very controversial, but if you look at it against the landscape of modern games, I totally understand why they've done it. And the old school me says, well, but you shouldn't do it because you're just unbalancing the gameplay in ways you can't control. But then you look at a tournament, and you look at a tournament has commentators going, and it gives the commentators shit to talk about. And I don't think you can underestimate the importance of that. If you actually put a viewer in front of a CPM duel or a VQ3 duel, chances are they were not going to have the foggiest clue what's going on. And the subtlety of the gameplay is very hard to talk through and make sense to the viewer. The action is incredible if you really understand what's going on. Some of the choices and things that players are doing can be really interesting if you really understand what's going on, but the chances are that the average viewer doesn't. Certainly a mainstream viewer wouldn't understand the difference between a really impressive rocket and a fairly average prediction rocket. And actually, possibly quite a lot of the commentators wouldn't understand. Whereas if you compare that to Quake Champions, and they can talk about, he's picked his Sorlag as a counterplay to his whatever. I have no idea how the Champion counterplay meta works. Whatever, you get the idea. It gives them stuff to talk about. You can make a spectator experience out of it. It gives them stuff to make spectating a game of Quake interesting to somebody who doesn't really understand. And I think that's really more valuable than people give credit. Now, obviously, you're going to have a meta, but the fact that you can have people talking about the meta and such and such a champion is currently strong in the meta, that fills the gap. Again, it's part of that spectator experience. So I can see why they did it. Part of me thinks we didn't need that in our day, but I get it, and I think it probably is the right design decision for them to take.
Understood. What was it like working with id Software, I guess, in Quake 4 and in Quake Live? If you can describe what the mood was internally as far as id was concerned and the Quake franchise, I guess.
So let me be clear that I didn't work for
That's
it,
correct.
and I wasn't really in it. So so really, all I can say is that it was Syncera did some really positive things to try and foster stuff in the community. So the community map pack in Quake 4, getting that together was no small effort, and I think it was represented a change from what had come before. When you look at what happened with Doom and the original Quake 1, 2, 3, they'd made the product, mod community had done its thing. There you go. And though there had been a lot of support for the community, it wasn't in the same way as what there was no official map packs or anything taking community content. The same thing with getting maps into Quake Live, this platform. How can and trying to drive relationship with the community and get people somehow. So yeah, there were positive efforts, I think, and you can still see that they're trying to do that kind of.
What do you think the future of Quake is like? Do you think it has a future?
It's hard to say, isn't it? Because it's not going to become the next Fortnite.
Absolutely.
And if somebody could work out what it is that takes something and makes it mass market, I don't know. You'd want to do that to Quake, because it would end up with a product that was not Quake. I hope that there is a future for the franchise. The way I guess the products look from the outside is that Doom has become the franchise that's going to focus on single player, and that Quake has become the franchise that will focus on multiplayer. They have diverged. What I saw of Doom at QuakeCon was that their embracing was great about the Doom reboot, which was the single player gameplay, and they're doubling down on that, and this whole idea of having people come and invade your single player experience is an interesting way to go with that. The Quake Champions shows doubling down on the Quake Arena concept, and I wish them every success with it. I hope it does carry on, because I think it would be a shame if it didn't.
Oh, what's interesting is that Doom for the Doom Eternal that's coming up, it looks like it has this time around they will not be outsourcing the multiplayer; they'll be doing it in-house, and it looks like it's going to be a relatively important feature of the upcoming Doom game. Of course, secondary to the single player. So it seems like, in fairness, that the Quake IP internally at id I think it's fair to say it's at the bottom, because it seems if you look at Rage, it seems like they went and hired a pretty well-known developer in Avalanche Studios. They're taking care of Doom internally, and that just only really leaves Quake, which was outsourced to unfortunately to a Russian developer, which doesn't really have a particularly good track record. So I don't know. It's unclear to me right now what it plans to do with Quake, and I imagine that Bethesda or ZeniMax, whoever it was that bought out its software, are not going to just let the franchise go to waste because they paid a pretty penny for the IP. But what direction that goes is hard.
I certainly don't have any inside info or anything like that. Maybe you've seen something that I've missed about what form the multiplayer in Doom will be. I thought it was along the lines of I'm not expecting it to be like an arena shooter mode.
No, I just meant to say it looks like its software is going to be taking the multiplayer aspect of Doom a little bit more seriously than the 2016 outing.
Again, completely from the outside,
yes,
but
me too.
With the Doom 3 multiplayer wasn't that? Sorry, Doom. Where am I? Doom 2016 multiplayer was outsourced, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
And what I think it looked to me, this is just my interpretation, was that you'd end up with Doom as a focused on single player with a different kind of social experience.
Understood.
Innovative social experience, maybe a bit like Dark Souls, maybe some stuff. I don't know. The arena shooter. I can't imagine they're going to, a core part of the identity of the company was around that history. Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's. I hope it's not a grim future.
Well, let me maybe a little bit of a controversial question. Looking at Quake Champions and the kind of product that has been released so far, what do you think the future holds for Quake Champions as a game? Do you think it will have the same kind of longevity as a Quake 1, 2, or 3, even a Quake 4, or do you, or like just generally, what do you?
Lost the end of that.
Sorry.
No worries. So the biggest difference between what came before and Quake Live and Quake Champion is mods. So the fact that you could have a team of enthusiasts who could take a product, extends the functional capabilities of the product, i.e. make the game different, and also just add content to it. That massive. Nobody played the original Quake 3 for the time they did. They played OSP, they played PMA, they played Rocket Arena 3, and all of the others. Quake Live already showed Quake Live showed, I guess, a few things, so that people would still play Quake on a platform. But the longevity of that is going to be hard. And although Quake Live managed to get community content in at a time when community could still create content, it was hard, right? Quake Champions has got the fact that it's going to be hard, if at all possible, to mod for. But I also, if you were thinking, I'd really like to be able to make a map for Quake Champions, you just have to eyeball the stock maps and look at how many people spent how many hours to make something that looks that quality.
That's right.
And say, well, as a hobbyist, how can I possibly hope to ever make one nice room that stands next to that kind of quality? It's not made for that kind of content. I was very interested to see what they tried with Doom, Doom 2016 and the what was it called?
Snap maps.
Snap map, yeah, because that was clearly, we see the problem. We see that Doom and Quake have had a heritage of user-created content. How can we address that? Can we create a system, a framework to allow people to do that? And the early stuff that I saw was, I guess, a bit disappointing because it wasn't easy. They'd made something that was which was hard to get the most out of. But I don't know what's become of that. I've not kept a finger on the pulse of SnapMap and what people are doing. I think people probably could do quite clever things with it.
There doesn't seem to be a particularly, I could be wrong here, a particularly large kind of like online community dedicated to like custom curated content in Doom 2016. I could be wrong, but I think that issue continues to persist even with snap maps. Is how does an amateur team manage to make professional looking levels with the tools that they're given? Even if they're given the tools, they're going to be very sophisticated. So the barrier to entry is going to be extremely high for even somebody who knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
Now, touching, I guess, level design and Quake Champions, it seems like Quake Champions is coming with CTF soon, and you've made one legit CTF map, and I think a couple of kind of joke remixes of TDM maps. It looks like there'll be some form of asymmetric CTF maps just because of the issues that I think you've already raised, that designing maps for Quake Champions is going to be difficult because of the artistic direction they've gone with and the kind of level of details they've gone with. What are your thoughts on asymmetrical CTF maps and CTF maps in general, I guess?
Yeah, so I can't speak as an expert CTF mapper.
Understood.
I think the maps that I made, I struggled with the symmetry and making interesting gameplay out of a symmetrical map. Mechanically was quite difficult. Just doing it in the tools was quite difficult. You got to rotate everything. Okay, to still play. And my whole method of jumping around, does this work? How does it feel? Was a challenge for me that I don't think I nailed. Similarly, just the structure of and the limits that it put on how the gameplay space in the middle area. If you're going to make this symmetrical, how are you going to work? So that I struggled with doing it symmetrical well. Doing asymmetrical well also seems like a big challenge. How do you make it so that one team doesn't have an advantage? Really difficult. And when we used to play, I was in a CTF clan for a while, and as I think you would have, if they would have a go on each end, would you play 10 minutes and then change end, have halves? That seems like almost necessary step to do, but even that isn't necessarily fair. If you have one side which is the easier sides to attack and you get to go first, is that an advantage? Is that a disadvantage? I don't know.
Well, yeah, that's an interesting point. I think with asymmetrical CTF maps, I don't like them conceptually, because when I had played, because if you remember, there was a mod for Quake 3, a realism mod for Quake 3 based on Action Quake 2 called Urban Terror. It's still around today. And all their maps effectively had this issue because they were all basically TDM maps that had flags planted in them and you'd play halves.
Yeah.
And it just became a game of who can run up the score the most. And I don't think that's particularly interesting. That's all. I think from a spectator perspective, it's like, okay, I know I'm going to watch 10 minutes of this team getting destroyed, and 10 minutes later, I'm going to have to see if this other team can get destroyed more than the first team.
Yeah. And it's one of the interesting things about Quake Champions, sacrifice game.
Yeah, what do you think
on
about sacrifice?
paper. On a whiteboard, I can see how somebody went, how can we make CTF more interesting? How can we make it more a stimulating gameplay experience? And it probably made complete sense. And there is just something that they need to do so that you don't just start playing and go, what the fuck is going on? I don't know. Because
Yeah, that's a
because
common
I think
experience for
too
most
many
people.
people have that experience, right? How do you make this a pub game mode? Because it has got all the right design elements in it from a gameplay point of view. I think the idea that you can choose which of those points you're going to take your glowy thing to takes offsets that fact that it's an asymmetrical map. Well, you can choose which bobblets you're going to go to. So to grabbing it first gives you the advantage of choice. Great. You've got the to and fro gameplay means that if you don't get that first choice, that you can still go back to your other pillar thingy and with your glowy blob. But somewhere along the lines there is, and I don't know if it's UI elements maybe, or uh, a little video that tells you this is what you're supposed to do with your
Right.
glowy thingy. But something is missing that they missed in launching Sacrifice.
I think it's the
And
combination of those two things. But go ahead.
yeah, and CTF is a hard game mode to get right because I remember we played around with things like weighty, heavy flags and drag and all that kind of stuff in the CPM design to try and fix some of the perceived problems with CTF, which were you could zoom in at a million miles back before you blink an eye and do nothing about it. A lot of which might have been offset by skills and maps, but regardless, that it's not an easy game mode to get right, and actually CTF gameplay can often get quite turgid because if you have two teams and they both decide to defend, as you might in a tournament, you can just be having a few people bashing their heads against each other in a not very fun game mode. So I don't think it's a slam dunk that when they introduce CTF that it will be fantastic. It's funny watching Overwatch. Overwatch is obviously the product of intense creative game design from Blizzard. Blizzard do is they take something that other people have done and they do it with extreme quality. And they didn't put CTF in, and I think it's for those reasons. I think CTF has its own problems. I think that possibly the Quake Champions community is going to be disappointed when they get what they've been asking. Because when you watch CTF come in as a custom game mode for Overwatch, it had all of those problems. It had stalemates, it had balanced games.
Yeah, it just
Yeah,
wasn't fun. Like Overwatch
yeah,
CTF, it's just not an enjoyable experience. When you're
mm,
attacking, you feel like you could die at any instant, and when you die, like you're reset quite hard.
yeah,
And there's no kind of all the strategical elements kind of go out the window with Overwatch CTF. All the things that make the heroes interesting, because I think one of the issues with Overwatch and CTF is that they never really made these characters with CTF in mind. That wasn't their frame of reference when they were designing these characters from the ground up, and as a result, none of them really have a proper place to fit in the game because almost all of them can be attackers and almost all of them can be defenders, and that doesn't really feel right. So you don't know what heroes you should be picking. With I think Quake with CTF and Quake Champions gonna have the following issues. CTF, the Quake Champions, Quake community as a whole, even the Quake Champions, is quite old, so that means everyone can aim well. A lot of the issues that affected aim in the past, shitty hardware, shitty networks, don't really exist anymore. And the hitboxes have gotten bigger and the starting weapons have become stronger. So I think you're going to have this issue in mid that became it was a big issue much earlier in VQ3 just because of the movement. With CPM, it became a little bit easier, but even now with modern CPM, with the way people hit, if you have 8 good players against each other, it becomes impossible to kind of get through mid, and it can become very congested in a non-rewarding way.
yeah.
And I think
And
that it'll be worse in Quake Champions, in fairness.
yeah, and I remember the debates about whether it's 4 5 players in a CTF match. That the EU used to play with 5,
Correct.
states used to play with 4, I
That's
think.
right.
And I remember of playing VQ3 CTF in competition was you could have an awful lot of uninspired matches, but what people remember about CTF is that time when something was coordinated really well and you make a breakthrough, and through coordination and good gameplay skills, get in, you get the flag, you get it out, and it feels really satisfying. That making the teamwork element strong and rewarding, and necessary almost, but not so necessary that without it being perfectly executed, you can't even touch a flag. Yeah, that's the design challenge.
It's going to be tough.
It's going to be tough, and having the champion abilities mixed in there is going to make it even harder still.
Yeah, and I think, that in combination of not being able to rapidly prototype a lot of maps is going to make everything feel like it's moving a lot slower. Because I can imagine with the right kind of maps, it could work pretty early on or work better earlier on. But if they have hyper choky maps, it's going to be an absolute pain in the ass to play. That's what it's going to feel like. It's just going to feel like you're spawning and you're getting obliterated mid.
Yeah, I know. If it were me, I would be. CTF wouldn't be the first thing I'd be adding. I'd be sticking Clan Arena in. Now, obviously, I'm an Rocket Arena noob. We established that at the start.
Oh, right.
So I'm biased, but I think it's another pub game mode that they need. And I'd be making Sacrifice work because I think the fundamentals of Sacrifice are right. They just need the right UI elements, the right voice signal, right extra something to make it clear what is going on at this point in time. And I think that should be more easy to do. Make CTF work.
They should just copy Blizzard, in fairness. Every time Blizzard introduces a new game mode in Overwatch, they just have a short cartoon before a match goes live to explain it. And because they're usually custom games in the arcade, basically every time a game type starts, they play that animation unless all the players press skip, and at that point it'll load live into the game. I think that was a really clever way of engaging the players to begin with. It gives the actual champions some life as well. They become somewhat personable. Because they're a little bit lifeless right now. You don't really know much about them or where they're from or what they're about. They're just these random dudes that can kill you. Which isn't really a lot of fun.
I mean, watching Blizzard stuff is a bit like a masterclass.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that you have to love Overwatch to acknowledge the design thinking to it.
No, Blizzard are brilliant. It is what it is. People might think Overwatch is some noob game, but if you actually just play it, I think you'll find something enjoyable in it. That's the crazy part. Okay. Anything else you'd like to discuss when it comes to either Quake or level design or basically anything? Because otherwise I'll move on to the next segment, which is going to be the rapid fire questions. Or is there anything that you were hoping we would have touched on that we haven't touched on yet?
Let me just think. I think we've covered most of what I thought we'd talk about. Let's go and let's do some.
But before we do that,
some rapid fire.
Any potential for you to ever make another Quake 3 map?
So I'll never say never.
Yeah, okay, because if you're not going to say never, then I'm just going to ask everybody to send you a PM every day until you start making it.
Yeah. Well, I will say that I've never quite managed to get the hang of Discord either, so those might just pile up in an inbox I never read.
No, please, it's such a simple... It's easier to use than IRC. You just download the client, and it starts when you boot up your computer and you're connected.
Yeah, I worked out how to stop that happening, so it doesn't. The truth is that these days I've got a career. I have other things in my life, and for the time that I had when I was at my mapping, I do not have it. Equally, I'm very rusty on the tools, and last time I tried to get Radiant to work, it just didn't. So it. While I'll never say never,
unlikely.
it would be quite a big step for me to actually brush off the mapping and do something, and I would probably have to have something specific driving me to do it.
Is there any way, or I guess another kind of question added onto that, that players could maybe submit maps for you to maybe take a glance at and give your opinions on? Would you have time to do something like that, or no, again, you just don't anticipate having the time to take a look and give people any kind of feedback?
I think that's more realistic.
Okay, awesome.
I used to enjoy watching maps in progress, and I guess the only thing is I don't know whether I've really finger on the pulse of what CPM gameplay is, because an important part of what I did in mapping was that I was also playing. So I was also in Nobles playing TDM games. I was also dueling actively, admittedly not at the same level, but I could jump on a server with some of the better duel players around at the time and watch them and or get beaten up by them. And I imagine things have evolved at least a little since then. So I wouldn't have the same kind of insight.
Understood, but okay, we'll try to figure out a way to make it easier for you. There is actually a Promode forums that are not public yet. I think we're just waiting for a couple of things to make them public. Maybe we'll get you on those. That will let you kind of be able to review things at will. Although I'm very nervous about you maybe forgetting about them existing and then disappearing for another year, a couple of years, and me having a difficult time trying to find you again. Okay, cool. So any players, any mappers that are around right now, feel free to send Swell and it's your maps, and at some point, if he has a chance, he'll get back to you. So that alone is actually worth a lot more than you think, because over the past 15 years, the knowledge base in the community shrunk quite significantly, even though it's still quite strong in comparison to other Quake or Quake-ish communities, Warsaws and Arctic, all the other stuff. I think the knowledge base in CPM is still probably the strongest when it comes to being critical of things related to Quake and Quake gameplay. I think we're still very good at that, even though there's not very many of us. But if you were able to kind of even give people some rough feedback that's pretty quick and pretty rush, I think people would take it to heart, just because of, you know, you have a really strong eye for what makes a competitive map, and you know that's hard to find, believe it or not. There's a lot of very good mappers that, I'll look, if you look at some of Hipshop's maps or Lunarin's maps or Sock's maps, they all look incredible. The truth of it is they've never had a single map fall into the competitive rotation, however, because none of them are really good enough in a competitive perspective, unfortunately. Even though they look beautiful. So yeah, that would be an incredible boon for the community if you could make yourself available like that. But again, you know, that's between you and the free time that you have, which isn't very much, unfortunately. Okay, so let's go to the rapid fire questions. So the point of...
But actually, before we do that, just quickly,
Yes.
so that you've reminded me of something. So you asked earlier, was it something I regret that we didn't do, or that we... So one of the things that I always felt that we should have done was one more map pack. There were maps that were beginning to come into the circuit that were from mappers who hadn't had some of that spotlight that you get by being included in the map pack. I think, yeah, it would have been good. There was a time where we should have recognised some of the maps.
What maps were you thinking of specifically?
So I'm struggling to remember the names, though.
If you can describe them, I think I can imagine what maps you're thinking of anyway, but if you could describe them just to be sure.
Yeah, no.
The
names.
Pucker 322 is probably one of them.
Yeah, yes, yeah.
It's probably Pucker 3 DM1 as well, Fury's 2v2 map. Maybe even Hectic, the Quake 3 version, should probably be in it. That's pretty much considered a default map. You know, that's considered a standard map in an extended pool.
Yeah,
CT3
that wasn't
DM5.
one of. Yeah, the Pucker and City maps were the ones I was thinking.
Yeah, it's hard now just because people have become so accustomed to the old files. The question becomes, do you want to replace... Would you think it's still worth it to do today, even though, you know, the digital footprint of the map is now all kind of Pucker 322 instead of like a CPM 32, for example? Do you think it'd still be worth it?
It just it just depends how easy it is for a player who wants to try the game to get onto a server, and if they get booted off the server if they haven't got the map.
Well, no, it doesn't happen with CNQ3. CNQ3 has a hidden downloading system that does everything really effectively and quickly.
So there you go. So it was a product of the time.
Understood.
That exactly none of that really worked, and the megabytes of files that we're talking about was an issue, whereas now that's a fraction of a second on a mobile bundling. So, but I guess there's two things though, because one of the other barriers to getting a custom map adopted is getting the visibility, getting people to give it a go. And it used to be that getting elevated and put into the CPM map pack was one of the things that you could do that might get people to give it a go. Even then, some of the maps that got put into the CPM map packs didn't get traction with the community.
And some of them are just awful, let's be frank. In retrospect, at the time, but when you look at it now and you look at the quality of a map like an 18-hour, a 21, a 26, 27, 3A, 1A, 29, 25, and look at some of the other maps that, there's strong points and weak points in the official map for sure.
Yeah.
So let's go to the rapid fire. Okay, so the point of this, you have to answer as quickly as possible. You can't sit there and think about it, okay? So you just gotta snap it out. Favorite game?
Quake.
Quake.
Just Quake asterisks, all of them.
Okay, understood. Favorite mod?
Rocket Arena, maybe.
Wow.
But the gameplay, obviously CPM is there, but I've got to be honest.
Your worst opponent to play against? Oh, your favorite opponent to play against, sorry.
Favorite?
Yeah.
I'll say Rat.
Your worst opponent to play against? Who did you hate playing?
The really good Polish guys.
I'm just gonna write Poles.
Generic. Poles. Good ones.
What's your favorite map to play?
I'll say 21.
What's the favorite map that you made?
Probably 21.
What's a map you wish you had made?
Q2DM1.
What's a map you really wish you had never released?
No, je ne regrette rien. I'm happy that they all went out, bad or otherwise.
And oh shit, I already answered that one. Okay, your most favorite, your favorite moment in CPM, I guess.
Favorite moment in CPM is probably I think I've answered before. Watching one Sanity. Watching them play out on CPM 21, 2018.
Most recent album that you paid for?
So Spotify means I don't buy my favorite albums anymore.
Right.
But so the one I wish I'd bought was Public Service Broadcasting's new album.
Understood. Favorite TV show?
Difficult. Possibly. What's it called? Fargo.
A favorite movie?
I'm influenced by the fact I've got Arnie and Predator as my wallpaper at the moment.
Okay,
so
that's good.
In my face.
Yeah, I think the wallpaper says more than enough for that question. Players who've impressed you the most?
Rat, Rafa. Are we banning this to CPM?
No, just Quake. I guess maybe
Quake in
esports in general.
Yeah. Well, let's stick with those two. They sort of rhyme. Rat and Rafa.
Understood. Who do you think is the best player? What was one VQ3 player you'd wished had come to try CPM just to see how they do? It could have been from the RA3 community or the Quake 2 community. It doesn't matter.
Did Rafa ever try it? Because I think his I've seen him talk. He puts a lot of thought into CPM, and having players with that level of thinking in the game would be great.
Who are your three favorite? I guess who is your favorite teammate in Nobles?
I can't say right again, right? So I have to say probably Drex.
Wow, he's
but
probably not
it was-
going to be
it
happy
was-
hearing that one. You settled for Drex. That's fair. Who was the worst opponent? Who was the worst teammate? Who was just like a awful teammate in Nobles? If anybody, if you don't, I'm not.
What? There weren't any awful teammates. MP is a special character.
Who was
I love him.
who was the weirdest member in the CPM community from what you can remember?
Oh, that's good. Well, within Nobles, Snapcase was always a character.
Snapcase is still around, by the way. We're good friends, actually.
Okay. Sure. Yeah. He's a cool guy, but remember at the time.
Yeah, tell us. Go on. Don't worry. He's never going to listen to this, so you can say whatever you want.
No, he was just on a slightly different wavelength. Fantastic player. Slightly different wavelength.
That's all the rapid fire questions I have. So we're going to move on to the community questions. There's a couple of them here. Nevergreen asks, I don't think you'll answer this at length because I think you have already, but what are key aspects for a good 4v4 map?
Yeah, 2 line guns, quad and a bat. Also,
did you say 2 railguns?
Two lining guns.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay, that's fair. Yeah.
So no, I think we've probably answered that.
Yeah.
Know the rules. Choose which one to break.
60 Wuffy asks, when will you fix no DM19?
What's wrong with it?
I don't know.
No. So I didn't know it was broken. If somebody wanted to fix it, and then I would sign it off.
Understood. So Terrifier asks, comparing the way the game is played today and how the game used to play when most of your CPM maps were designed, what would you do differently in 2018? Or rather, how would you approach designing differently?
So it's a good question, but I don't have my finger on the pulse of what the game is like today enough to know. But probably it's about, if the weapon power tiers have changed a bit because of the low latency, maybe putting those lightning guns, those rail guns in, well, they were always in quite special places anyway, but revisit that and say, is that spot still sufficiently hazardous for that weapon? Because that's what I'm guessing has changed the most.
Yeah, just generally, I think the overall skill level, even of the beginners, has gone up. The kind of like beginners you would see in 2001, 2, 3, 4, 5, we don't see them as often. In fact, there was a young VQ3 player who came into the North American scene earlier this year and just wiped everybody out, including Galasak and Kwong. I mean, they had competitive games, of course, but like he ended up beating everybody fairly quickly. And generally, like, there's just a lot of really strong young aimers between 17 to 21, which I think was a bit more rare. There's more people that have like really, really strong hit scans, so that's interesting. And I think games like TF2 and not so much over, but especially TF2 became really big amongst the young players, and that helped develop their hit scan aim a lot. A lot of those guys that come in end up doing quite well in CPM as well because they understand how to aim.
And that was kind of the case back in the day. There were some really good VQ3 players at the time who would dabble over in CPM and do surprisingly well, despite the fact that they were just doing VQ3 strafe jumping. Yeah.
Let's see. What Soren asks. What is your favorite duel and TDM maps? What is your favorite duel and TDM maps you've made? And do you have a clear vision of your map before you start working on it? So I guess your favorite duel and TDM, you said 21, and I think. So what's your favorite duel map you like to play on?
So I like to. So I haven't dueled in a long time. Q2DM1 was my all-time favorite. When I used to play in VQ3, I used to like 24. I was a railgun noob, I guess. In CPM, I used to like. We all just played CPM and 3 all the time. But I did play the others as well. But CPM 3 has a special place.
And CPM 21 is your favorite map to play as well? Your favorite TDM map, is that
Yeah.
fair? Now, in terms of maps that you made, what's your favorite dual map? I guess in fairness, you've only made one dual map with and 1.5 with the ZTN remix, right? Is that fair?
Yeah. For CPM, yes. So Hectic.
Hectic as well.
I think Hectic is a technically better map. But I've never played the CPM version against another human beings. I don't know how well it plays in CPM.
It plays pretty well. It plays as you would imagine a smaller single atrium map working inside a game with strong weapons and strong movement. So a lot of fragging out, a lot of kind of back and forth in terms of the balance of power between the two players, and even getting a frag be very costly to you. So the spawning player might be able to do a lot of damage even with just the machine gun sometimes, but not very frequently. But the 5-second weapon respawn makes it easy to kind of stack up in terms of weapons. Bjark asks, this might be a bunch of questions. So, how did you go about designing CPM 21? What was your design philosophy for making TDM and 2v2 maps?
So the actual gameplay shapes we talked about, but again, and I'll come back to that point, which was at that point in time, it was all about making sure that you had enough space for 2 teams, and the team that was losing would have enough of a foothold to come back in. So making sure that you had it was worth controlling areas. You couldn't control them. And almost counting. Okay, that means I need about 5 to 7 zones. What's going to be in them? Balancing out around that. Similar with 2v2, right? So you need 3 zones for a 2v2, maybe 4 that are controllable. So give yourself room for the up team to have control and for it to be worth them taking control. But there's still room for the team who's not in control to get a foothold and come back.
Bjark also asks, what are differences between designing levels for CPMA and VQ3, if any? Does the movement change design principles used?
Archon was very keen on this point that you shouldn't make maps with trick jumping specifically in mind. Even if you do specifically put trick jumps in, there should always be a mundane way of getting there. But I think inevitably you have to take account of CPM movement. Double jumping and ramp jumping in particular creates the hugest problem. If you angle a service to make it look pretty,
right,
you've created the ability to fly to the moon. So you do have to take account of that a little bit. And probably I've put much less thought into making 3 maps. I would imagine there are some scale issues to take into account in VQ3 vanilla gameplay.
Bjark also asks, but I think in fairness you answered this, what are your thoughts on Quake Champions and the way they design their maps?
Yep.
I think you're welcome to answer again if you'd like. If you don't want to, that's
no.
What are 3 to 5 things that you learned when making levels for CPMA at that moment? Oh, that aha moment. Were there any kind of critical breakthrough moments where you're like, okay, now I understand something that I fundamentally just was not aware of or had misunderstood previously?
Wow, that's what curves work.
Okay.
No, but from a design point of view, I think I don't know. The zone-based gameplay was probably a big thing for the TDM maps. Thinking about zones, but
I think it's interesting the
understanding
way.
how.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, so getting a good handle on minimum visual quality for lighting and how to make something basically work. That took a lot of maps to get so that I could do something fairly quickly that was lit fairly well. Yeah, struggling for a third.
Bjark's final question is, do you still make levels? Which I think you answered, and just generally, what have you been up to?
Yeah, no, not these days. Working.
Now, this is the final question, but it's a lengthy question, so please bear with me. I think we might have to break it down to the smallest part. Lola Grade asks, it seems that in retrospect to say that the gameplay balance should be... Oh, okay, he's made some grammatical errors that I'm going to try to fight through as well. So it seems easy in retrospect to say what the gameplay should be, but when you first set out to create something new/different, the path is not so clear. Could you share your thoughts on the balance between a design philosophy and a pragmatic or incremental changes needed to keep things in order? So I guess this is a question in terms of between adhering. When do you know, I guess, to adhere to the rules, and when do you know to kind of either abstain using the rules or to break the rules straight out? Because he's right. There's got to be this balance between this kind of chaotic and random of placing down blocks and then having a conceptual idea that these blocks kind of morph into.
Well, it's quite an abstract question.
Right.
So
Level design seems to be in a lot of ways very abstract when you start off because you really don't know what you're doing.
Yeah. And I think, and you can see this in a lot of modern software, well, agile methods take some of these kinds of iteration, rapid prototyping, fail fast, are mantras these days in software development, sorts of things that get involved with work. But if you apply that to mapping, I think creating things that could be interesting, trying them, seeing if they still seem as though they will be interesting. Get the opinion of trusted advisors. I wouldn't have been able to make the maps I made and then have great gameplay without me having people like Drex and the Nobles team on hand to give me feedback. So prototyping with them was an advantage I had that a lot of mappers didn't have. Yeah, I think that's it.
Lola Grade also asks, does gameplay balance find itself?
That's an interesting one. Maybe. That you look at things that should, as long as both players have opportunities, both teams, and it's not and the decisions that they take and actions that they take can change the outcomes. Then I don't see why not. Yeah, why not have?
Yeah. Sorry.
They're gone.
Okay. Also, he actually kind of expands on this question of balance finding itself. He says, let me unpack that question for a bit. Quake World's lightning gun and rocket launcher are insane. Some non-Quake players might say they're overpowered, but a die-hard Quake World player would say they are just right. The game's meta has evolved to account for the weapon balances. There is also an aspect of how the environment in which the game exists has evolved. Hardware is generally better, people have better computers, mice, monitors, and the internet connections are also generally better. For Promode, even though the gameplay has not changed very much in the past 10 years or so, the meta has evolved, partly because people have played longer, but maybe partly because of the hardware of the internet. So I guess the ultimate question it comes back to, and I think somewhat you answered, is the gameplay finding itself. Does the community find ways to kind of deal with the issues, for example, in Quake World, the strong lightning gun and rocket launcher, and that in combination with improved settings, has this made it more easy for the balance to find itself? I guess I think that's because there's no question at the end of it. This end part was just kind of a comment he was referring to the first question. I don't know if that makes the question different to you, or if you would have a different way you'd answer that, not knowing the context.
I think the question makes sense. It's a bit like I was talking about with dueling on DM2, right? the and the maturity of the environment. The maturity of the game. Once you have something that's stable, players can layer their experience and their knowledge on top of it, and you learn counterplay upon counterplay upon counterplay. And when you've got a mature game and a mature set of maps, then yeah, the meta is safe to evolve. You don't want to tinker too much. Now, does that mean that the Quake 1 lightning gun's too powerful and the CPM one's too weak? No, I don't think so.
I agree.
I think that's a different discussion.
Understood. Well, that's it for all the questions I have, the community has, and I can think of. Is there anything else you'd like to touch base on or discuss? I'm happy to.
I think it's been really great to go through some of these sort of crusty bits of my memory. I've spent this long thinking about Quake for a long time. It's quite refreshing to hear that people are still actively playing and that the maps are still a fun place to hang out, because it's very satisfying for me to know that that people are still having fun playing stuff that I made all those years ago.
Yeah, and I think we're going to continue to. I don't honestly. People have been saying CPM is going to die for so long that I just don't believe it anymore. I think we'll be here for at least another decade or two. And it'd be great to have you, involved in the community, even though like you're really strained for time, and I understand. But I think you just being around sometimes might be a much bigger help for some of the members in the community than you think, just because they realize that there's something tangible about the people that made Promode and some of these maps they've played. So that'd be great. But thank you so much for taking the time to go through this with me. I know it's been like 2 and a bit hours at this point, so you might be a bit worn out, but it was great talking to you. I definitely learned a lot, and I think a lot of the players learned a lot, and I imagine some of the stuff that you said will be referenced for some time, because like I said, the brain trust in the community is shrinking, and people do still look up to you as an authority when it comes to level design, even though you haven't done it in a long time.
Yeah, well, happy to do it. Thank you very much for having me.
No, thank you very much. So guys, I'm going to close the stream. Thank you all for listening, and that's the